Hello, my name's Rob Edwards, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today we're talking Doctor Who, and in particular I want to talk about the very end of the third of the 60th anniversary specials. So if you haven't seen the 60th anniversary specials, this video isn't for you. Spoilers, massive spoilers, await in a very short amount of time. So please go watch episode 3, The Giggle, and return here when you're ready for a discussion about what I think is the controversial part of this episode. Okay, so, by generation. This breaks canon, this changes everything, this has destroyed Doctor Who as we know it. I'm not so sure. And the reason I'm not so sure is I don't know that we've ever had two regenerations that are exactly the same as each other. And certainly there are aspects to regeneration that we've seen previously, even in classic Who, which could support the concept of bigeneration being a thing. Let's take a stroll back through classic regenerations and have a talk about how they happened and the circumstances around them. First regeneration, Hartnell into Troughton. This old body's wearing a bit thin. Makes sense. It is not, as a lot of regenerations are, because of some drastic injury or illness or poisoning. It is simply that that doctor's body has worn out. He's been using it too long, and it is time for him to regenerate. That is fine. That establishes the protocol. That establishes that regeneration is a thing. And we understand that one of the circumstances that the Doctor might regenerate in is if they've been using the same body for a really long time. Fine. Okay. Regeneration number dos. We have a regeneration from Troughton into Pertwee. Now this is a weird regeneration because it is imposed upon the Doctor. The Time Lords... I should say, by the way, spoilers for all of Classic Who as well. The Time Lords catch up with their renegade Time Lord, the Doctor, force him to regenerate and exile him to Earth. Bye-bye now. And of course, that makes that regeneration something of an exception, because it doesn't happen naturally because the Doctor's body is worn out. It is imposed upon him. Okay, so we now know two circumstances that regeneration can happen in. Okay. Third regeneration, at the end of Planet of the Spiders, the Doctor returns from Metabolist 3, radiation poisoned, collapses on the floor of Unit HQ, and ostensibly dies. Sarah Jane certainly thinks so, the Brigadier certainly thinks so. Until, I've forgotten the name of the character, I should have looked it up before I started this video, never mind, turns up and gives his regeneration a jump start. Says, no, we can still regenerate him. So this is the first time we see what I think is, I expect is the classic version of regeneration, which is specifically that the Doctor has taken some serious injury, radiation poisoning in this case. But bit of an exception here that it requires a jump start for the process to actually work. So it's almost like the regeneration wasn't going to happen. If it hadn't received that jump start, the Doctor would have properly died, potentially. So that makes the regeneration, obviously from Pertwee into Baker, something of an exception. And then we get to Baker into Davison. And this, I think, is the most interesting one for our conversation here. The regeneration is caused by the Doctor falling off a big radio telescope, collapsing to the ground. So he has taken an injury. And this time he does regenerate without some slightly dodgy monk-type character turning up to jumpstart him. Except, what does happen in the Baker regeneration? For most of the episode, he's being stalked by the Watcher. A mysterious guy, all dressed in sort of diaphanous white robes, a white faceplate over his face so you can't see what he looks like. And at the end, when the regeneration happens, the Watcher approaches and merges with Baker's Doctor to become Davison's Doctor. And I think it's Adric off screen says something like, "The Watcher was the Doctor all along." Now, this is Adric we're talking about, so not necessarily a huge authority on the subject of regeneration. But still, we have an example here where two bodies are being combined into one to make the next Doctor. The whole two bodies thing sounds familiar, but we'll circle back to it, because I think we can fairly say that this is an unusual example of regeneration in Doctor Who. I think this is not a normal regeneration. Okay, all right. So then we're talking Davison into Baker part 2. So Peter into Colin. And this is possibly, interestingly, the first kind of normal regeneration we've seen in a while. There's no external impetus, there's no Watcher turns up, there's no dubious monk turns up, the Time Lords aren't forcing this regeneration. He is regenerating because he's had Spectrox toxemia, he's been poisoned, and now needs to regenerate to recover from that. And this is a kind of traditional one, which is peculiar because during this regeneration, the Doctor says, "Might regenerate. I don't know. It feels different this time." Which, that's fair because, as we've just established already, he's not had a normal regeneration since potentially Hartnell into Troughton. But the fact that the Doctor says it feels differently makes me wonder if this is not somehow also something of an exceptional regeneration. That's weird. Baker into McCoy. Well, this is obviously tempered a little bit by the oddness of the BBC at the time and not making the deal for Colin Baker to come back. So we generate from McCoy in a wig to McCoy not in a wig. I think we can assume in the context of the story that this is, again, a relatively normal regeneration. Although, if you listen to Big Finish and this run-up for the Sixth Doctor's last adventure, does also cast a bit of a doubt onto how normal a regeneration that one is as well. So, to get to this point, to get to the end of Classic Who, because I think McGann is a slightly separate case of itself, but to get to McCoy, we've had one old age, one forced regeneration, one required a monk to help, one required the Watcher merging with Baker to create Davison, one maybe normal, but felt different this time, one actual normal regeneration. So in the process of all of Classic Who, every regeneration is a little bit different, every regeneration works a little bit different, and at least one regeneration involved two bodies becoming one. When it comes to regenerations for McCoy to McGann, we have the American television version of Doctor Who, the TV movie. I think we could probably call that a normal regeneration, although there are some weirdnesses around it. The fact that he dies for some time and only regenerates once he's been in the morgue for a few hours is a bit weird. We can put that down to it being not sort of traditional Classic Who, potentially, but we can also suggest this is another example of a strange regeneration, because all of the regenerations are a little bit strange. And then, of course, we have McGann into the War Doctor, and that is absolutely a little bit strange. That is, the Doctor is dead and has to be brought back to life by the Sisters of Khan for 4 minutes, at which point he drinks an elixir which turns him into the War Doctor, into John Hurt, and this is the first time, canonically, that we see the flashing yellow lights of regeneration from the Doctor, which you could start to argue maybe is the new look for regeneration, or because the Sisters of Khan have interfered, that's how regeneration looks. Except, of course, we've seen the Master regenerate as well, and that also now has the shining lights thing about it. So I think we can assume That's how regeneration is supposed to look. But still, that aside, the elixir, the already being dead, all of these things make McGann into Hurt a bit of a weird regeneration. Hurt into Eccleston is actually, we are told, an example of the very first type of regeneration. I suppose it makes sense. Body's wearing a bit thin, says Hurt, and regenerates into Eccleston. So this is my more traditional regeneration. Go traditional regenerations. And then we get into the whole New Who stuff. And I don't feel that I necessarily need to go into quite as much detail about these ones. Eccleston regenerates because he's taken the entire time vortex into him. That's weird. Tennant, his regeneration, although it's because of radiation poisoning, has this whole kind of reset and extended tour of all companions ever before actually regenerating thing. That's weird. Oh, and Tennant into Tennant, the meta-crisis, also weird, but meh. And then we have Smith's regeneration, which is weird and an unusual regeneration because, allegedly, he's reached the end of his regeneration cycle. So the Time Lords have to interfere and give him a new regeneration cycle. I mean, somewhat contradicted by the whole timeless child thing, but so that's a bit of an exception to the regenerations. 12 to 13. Arguably another traditional regeneration. Although, again, the Doctor dies, and does Bill use magic powers to bring him back a little bit? Maybe. Her magic tears brings him back. It's a bit like the elixir from the Sisters of Khan, maybe. So again, there is a bit of an oddity to that regeneration. And when we get into Whittaker back into Tennant, well, I think we can safely say that is a weird regeneration. So at the end of the day, when we get to the Giggle and it's time for 14 to regenerate into 15, I think it is fairly accurate to say there hasn't been a normal regeneration since, well, War Doctor. There hasn't been a normal. There is no such thing as a normal regeneration. So if we're talking bi-generation, if we're saying this is a weird one, yes it is, but that doesn't make it different from anything else. If we're saying, well, suddenly there are two Doctors, I would direct your attention back to the Watcher at the end of Baker's tenure. I think I don't have a problem with bi-generation. I think some of the things that RTD has said about bi-generation and what it means for previous canon is a little bit odd. Unless we actually physically go back to a scene where Matt Smith regenerates into Capaldi and then wakes up as Matt Smith again. But at least it gives us the Tales of the TARDIS. So I'm not a fan of that aspect of bi-generation. But the actual bi-generation we see on screen, the actual bi-generation we actually experience as an audience, I have no problem at all with it. Except I'm not a big fan of the two TARDIS thing. The two TARDIS thing is a bit weird. It does require a little bit of oh yes, we use the magic powers of the Toymaker from a magical hammer, which I don't remember seeing the Toymaker use. If we'd seen the Toymaker use that magical hammer, I might feel a bit better about it. So that is a bit of an oddity. So that is the only thing which bugs me about the bi-generation, that we can get a second TARDIS simply by hitting it with a magic hammer. That's a bit strange, but other than that, I don't see the problem. Bi-generation, I'm into it. If I get time, if I get an opportunity, I'm going to try and record a little bit more of a longer video talking about the 3 60th anniversary specials. Because I really enjoyed them and I do want to talk about them. But this thing is something that I wanted to get off my chest because I've seen a lot of people already not really liking the bi-generation and saying it breaks canon when it absolutely in no way breaks canon. It's different, but then all regenerations have been different. Thanks very much for watching, I'll catch you sometime in the future. Cheers.